Do you have a Sentro circular knitting machine and would like to make more than a double layer beanie hat? Go get your machine out of the box, and today we're going to make a beginner ear warmer, and it can also be a neck warmer as well. Skills you need for this tutorial is the waste yarn cast on and cast off method, along with how to close the tube in the round. I'm going to show you how to do this in the tutorial, but if you need more information or helpful tips on to successfully use your Sentro knitting machine, take a look at the playlist link below, Sentro Basics. For this tutorial, we need your machine set into tube mode. So the button on the side of your machine should look like this, where the button is down next to the T, which stands for tube. You can also make this project on the King Addi 46 and also the Sentro 40 knitting machine. It just wouldn't be as wide. So to get going making our ear warmer or our neck warmer, I'm using this yarn from my yarn stash. It's I Love This Yarn in Cobblestone Ivory, and it's the print collection. Now this is a thicker number 4 medium weight 100% acrylic yarn. Acrylic yarn's really great for beginners because it's smoother, it doesn't catch like wool yarn can, and it works really nicely in the machine. Now this is slightly thicker, so I'm putting it in my yarn basket and I'm pulling it through the center. You can also cake your yarn if you would like, or you can ball it as well. I like putting it on the ground in front of my machine. This helps a little bit with tension. Next, you're also going to need what's called waste yarn. This is in a contrasting color that's not part of your project yarn, but in a similar weight. I like to use yarn scraps for this. We're going to cast on. I like to start at my white needle because that's just a nice starting and stopping visual point for me. And we'll do our cast on, and then once we get back to our white needle, we're going to put it down into the yarn holder. And then I'm going to put the yarn in the middle hole of my yarn tensioner. And now I'm going to crank out about 7 rows or so, and this is our waste yarn cast on. Once done, I'm going to put that yarn into the middle of the machine. Now we're going to add on our project yarn. I put on a little bit of a tail because we don't want it to come off of our machine. And I'm going to start my first row on the left side of my white needle. You'll notice that the waste yarn is still hooked under the white needle, and so we don't want to skip any needles with any yarns, or else you're going to get a hole and then you'll get a drop stitch. I have the yarn in the middle hole of my yarn tensioner, but you'll also see that I'm not just relying on my yarn tensioner by itself. I'm also using my left hand to create tension. The next question I always get is how many rows should I do? This will vary depending on your head circumference and the yarn that you're using. With this yarn, I like to do about 80 rows, and this works really well for a lot of number 4 medium weight acrylic yarns. Now, if you have a larger head circumference, you might want to add about 5 or so rows at a time until you get the length that you want. So you might have to play around with it a bit. If you have a smaller head circumference or wanting to make it for a child, you will probably need less rows. But it also will depend, like I said, on your yarn. If you have a thinner yarn, you might need more rows because thinner yarn won't create as long of a project. So if you haven't used this type of yarn before to make an ear warmer or a neck warmer, you're going to have to do a test project and see how it goes, and then you might need to add or subtract a few rows. Now that I'm almost done with my 80 rows, you'll see I almost messed up and almost went past my white needles and did 81 rows, but I caught it in time. So we're going to remove the project yarn from the machine and just put it down into the middle of the machine. You can still see it's hooked onto the white needle, and I'm going to pull up my waste yarn, and we're going to do the cast off with the waste yarn. So I'm putting this on my number 1 needle. You can see my white needle, which is the 48th needle that the project yarn is still hooked to. That needle's down into the machine, so it's hard to see. So this next needle to the left, that's my number 1 needle. And for the cast off, when I'm doing the waste yarn method, I like to do at least 10 rows because we're just going to crank out, and I let the yarn completely run out, and then you crank it around again and you'll see the project just fall off the machine. So this waste yarn will have live stitches, so it can unravel a little bit. So that's why I do extra rows, just for a little bit extra security in case they drop. I don't want it to drop down into the project yarn. So here is the width that your project's going to be using the 48 needle circular knitting machine. It's about 7 inches. If you had the 40 needle circular knitting machine, your project width will be about 5 inches. So here's just showing you the difference in thicknesses that you're going to have between the 2 machines. I really like the 40 needle for making headbands as well. That machine works really well for it. So now the fun part is we're going to stitch our tube in the round. And this is where it was really important to use a contrasting color for your waist yarn so you can see your first row of project stitches on either side of your tube. So you can see I have the tail ends of the yarns on both sides of the tube put together. They're lined up, and I want to make sure my tube is flat and have no twists in it. Now you can see as I pull the fabric, you're going to see 2 rows of pink, and in the middle, sandwiched in between the 2 rows of pink, is my project yarn. That's the first row of live stitches of my project on either side of my tube, and those are the stitches we want to pick up, and we're going to slip stitch with our crochet hook to make it like an infinity or continuous piece of fabric. So using my crochet hook, I've picked up the first 2 stitches on either side of my tube, and I'm going to slip stitch one through the other. Now I have 1 stitch left on my hook. Now I'm going to pick up the opposite side, pick up the next stitch down, and slip stitch it through the loop. Now we're going to create a zigzag effect. So now we need to go to the opposite side of the tube, pick up 1 stitch, and pull it through the other. This is a slip stitch, and we're going to do this back and forth till we get all the way around back to our starting point. And this is how we get a really nice finished edge, making the 2 tubes come together. One important thing is you want to make sure you don't skip one of the stitches. If that happens and then we remove that waist yarn, that stitch will be live if it's not secured, and so then that row of stitches will drop. So before you move your waist yarn, you want to just double check your work and make sure you have no holes in that zigzag pattern. If you have a hole, that means you skipped a stitch. And when you get back to where the tail end of your project yarn and the waist yarn is, that's where some of these stitches can kind of hide because of the difference in tension. And so you just want to double check that you have each one picked up. So I'm going to fast forward this and meet you back where our tail ends of the yarn come together. When you get back to the first tail end of your project yarn, we are just going to slip stitch those into the project as we continue doing our zigzag pattern back and forth. We're going to pick up the stitch here, got 1. Now we're going to go to the other side, pick up that stitch. Now we have the tail end of the project yarn. We want to slip stitch that in right there. You kind of just need to keep tension on that tail. Then you'll find your next stitch over on the other side. This is where they can kind of hide a little bit, so just be careful. Go back to the other side, and then we need the tail end of our other side of our tube of the project yarn, and then we're just going to pull that all the way through, and now it is secured all into place and it's not going to come undone. And then we will secure those down by doing a little knot at the end of our project. But once you have everything slip stitched together, now we can remove our waist yarn. Now before you do this, make sure every stitch is picked up, and now we're going to remove the waist yarn. There's going to be an easier side and a harder side. The easier side is going to be your cast off side. When we just let it drop off of the project, you'll just pull the end of that tail yarn and it will come undone. The cast on side is a little more difficult. You have to first undo the first row by pulling it out of the stitches. Once you've done that, then it will come out really easily. So just take your time, but I also have linked in the video description below how to remove waist yarn with cutting it out. If you have any difficulties with that, I will show you step by step in a whole tutorial there. Now the last thing we need to do is I just knot the tail ends of the project yarn, and then I'm going to weave it in between the 2 layers, back and forth a few times, and then cut off any excess, and now your ear warmer or your neck warmer is complete. Thank you so much for making this project with me. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit that like and follow button for more free tutorials for the Sentro Circular Knitting Machine. I appreciate all the likes, all the follows, and all of the wonderful comments. Happy crafting, everybody.